that beat.
The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Welcome back to the show, everyone, where we explore how empathy, connection, purpose shape the way we work and lead. I'm Stephen, joined by my co-host Mike today, and our special guest. So in a world overflowing with data, many organizations forget a simple truth. People do not move without a story. Ideas need narrative to gain traction. And we talk a lot about building emotional connection and how important that is in our marketing and internally with your team. And today we're exploring how storytelling and community building intersect in business with our guest. Mike, introduce our guest today.
Yeah, to do just that, Stephen. Our guest today is Gavin McMahon. He's an engineer turned storyteller, author, CEO, and co-founder of Fassforward, and that's Fass Forward, and Story Business. Now, interesting as well, like Gavin began his career building submarines, sports cars, and steel plants. But over time, he realized that business success is not just about really execution, it's about persuasion, the narrative, really the human connection that's created. With an MBA in innovation strategy and information technology, Gavin as well now helps companies shape their strategy, right? Their leadership and the culture through this key of storytelling. He believes that even the best ideas go nowhere unless they're told well. So, Gavin, we are so delighted to have you on the show today. Welcome to our show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, Gavin, your work shows that stories are not just kind of nice to have accessories, but are foundational, right? So why do you believe storytelling is central to building connection in business?
I think so. When I was researching the book, I watched it was a conference that Shonda Rhimes, who did Grey's Anatomy and all those TV shows, she was speaking at a A16Z conference, so speaking to Silicon Valley, and she was talking about the power of storytelling. And you know, in one moment she turned around and said, "The best television show that I've ever seen is this show called Dark. It's a German TV show. It's on Netflix if anyone's interested." There's a line in that show. So I obviously went down this bunny trail because I was watching this, and there's a line in the show where one character says to the other, the truth is the story we tell ourselves. And that's just stuck with me ever since, because I do think it's true. It explains a lot of the politics in any country. It explains the politics in an organization. It explains why people make decisions a certain way, because we're all telling ourselves stories. Mm-hmm. And as I went down that bunny trail, I came across a neuroscientist called Friederike Fabricius. And she talks about the systems in our heads and how they work. I am, full disclosure, not a psychologist or a neuroscientist, but she talks about this idea that we all have a narrative network. And that's the parts of our brain that light up when we're just kind of on idle, when we're not really doing anything. And the narrative network basically puts us at the center of the universe. We're always the hero of our own story. And all we're doing, and the people listening to this podcast now will be doing the same thing, they'll be thinking, what has this got to do with me? And so we live in this world surrounded by stories. And it's, you know, I was trained exactly the opposite way, where it's not that the universe is made up of atoms, but as the poet, I think Muriel Rukeyser said, the universe is made up of stories. So I think that's the fundamental thing. And when you talk about connection, we're really trying to connect a lot of different people who are all the center, the hero of their own stories. And I think that's foundational.
It's interesting. Gavin, maybe let's talk a little bit more about the people part, because that seems key to the storytelling. You know, as we mentioned in the intro, you used to build pretty complex things like submarines and steel plants. Yeah. But once the people kind of entered into the equation, I'm curious, like, how did that exactly shift or maybe perhaps inform your philosophy around storytelling?
Well, it took a long time, honestly, for me. For a long time, I believed the world was a meritocracy. If you just work hard, if you just do the right thing, it will all work out. And I think, in some ways, I say this jokingly, my parents lied to me because they basically told me that, and I believed it. And I believed it probably well into my, at least my early 30s. And I became an engineer. I studied engineering at university, became an engineer. I worked in the defense industry, and you were just working with things. And my first real experience of working with things and people was I was working in Africa, and we were building a steel plant. I built the steel plant, I'd left, and then I was asked to come back and run the company. And, when you're an engineer, you think about, I have a plan, we're going to do it this way, and then everything should go according to plan, because that's how I thought about it. And you're always just breaking down problems and fixing things and rebuilding things. That's just how engineers think. And so they get, as an engineer, I'm going to speak for all engineers and massively stereotype, which I shouldn't do. But as an engineer, you're like, why are these people doing this? Why are they messing up my best laid plans? And so when I was running this factory, more and more people got in the way. And sometimes they got in the way in a really good way because they expanded on whatever we were doing. They made the production line go faster. They did more pours in a day, whatever they did. And sometimes they got in a way in a bad way because somebody hadn't really explained something very clearly to the other person, and it became bad. And I think when you think about business and the world of business, we're all here. I mean, the capitalistic version is we're all here to create value. So if you have someone delivers pizza to your door, they're creating value by delivering pizza to your door. A big company or a small company is trying to create value at some kind of scale. And you've got a lot of people who are all making decisions, rubbing up against each other, all trying to create value. And all those people that are rubbing up against each other live in the stories in their own head and are telling stories to everyone else. And they're all doing it because we're making decisions every day, large and small, to create value. So I that's a long-winded answer to, I think, we're definitely not living in a meritocracy. We're living in a world where humans are getting in the way. And if you can't figure out how to speak human and how to get things across, then you're going to struggle.
Yeah. Yeah, I love your point there earlier too about how we become the heroes of the story, because quite frankly, it's hard to tell a very good story without people in it, right? It needs characters, and we got to see ourselves in them. I'm actually a little curious, from the work that you've done around storytelling, have you found that there's certain types of stories that are better, like say a personal or a vulnerable or maybe a humorous type of story, or is there a balance of all that in helping to build connection in a business?
I think it's a really good question. I think there are many different types of story, many different flavors. I would say stories, depending on the person telling it, they have to be authentic, or they're much better if they're authentic. They're going to land better if there's truth, if you're a truth teller, not a fable teller. Humorous stories work in certain situations, but I think as a leader, you're generally telling stories to answer a bunch of questions. So where are we going? Who are we? How do we make money? These are all questions that I think people have all the time, and we don't spend very long explaining them. In fact, most senior executives I work with, they'll feel like, I think one of the biggest challenges they have is they feel like they've told somebody once or maybe twice, and that's it. They should get it. Now we're off to the races doing this thing, whatever this thing is, this transformation. And it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
When you were bringing up those examples of like those questions, I instantly see the leader, and I'm picturing like just this corporate jargon just coming out in those stories. So how do you coach someone who's, kind of struggles with that, to telling it something that's a bit more human and authentic?
Well, there's a very specific coaching technique that I do tend to use one-on-one when I'm working with people, which is I basically get people to tell me a joke, and most people don't love it. And because I don't think most people are volunteering to do open mic night down at the local comedy club. But if you think about what a joke is basically two stories. And the first story can be a little bit meandering. That's the setup. And then the punchline you have to land. Now, when you do this meandering story, there are certain elements you have to hit, or the punchline does not make sense. So that's a really good practice and a really good technique for being able to tell stories. The other thing that I would say, and I learned this from Ronan Dunn, who's the former CEO of Verizon Wireless, he talks about weekend speak. And I think so many companies speak to each other in high corporatese, where they will use their terms of art and use their acronyms and use their jargon, and they basically talk to themselves. Especially the bigger the company is, the more they get practiced at talking to themselves. And then they don't understand why, when they've been speaking basically a foreign language from Monday through Friday all during the week, at the weekend, when they're trying to sell something, when they're trying to work with somebody from the outside of that company, they have a tough time communicating. So this idea of weekend speak comes from Ronan, and I think it's really true. And there's some real basics, cut out acronyms, use really short words. I mean, why are you making people think when you want people to think about the thing you want them to think about, not the message container that you're wrapping it in, because you didn't understand what they were saying. So I will bet you've had this. You're kind of in the back of the room somewhere in a different company, and somebody uses an acronym. And I've honestly turned around to somebody and said, what does XYZ acronym mean? Right. And I would say 80 to 90% of people will tell you roughly what it means, but they will never know exactly what it means. And that's, all over.
In journalism, I remember we had this thing where we just called these sentences like alphabet soup, is when you ended up with these acronyms and multiple. You're just like, there's just too many letters coming at me here that don't make anything that resembles a story or a thought. Just because each of those things are like blockers, right?
Yeah.
To this.
And I have pet peeves of certain words as well, like utilize. I don't know why anyone utilizes the word utilize when they can use the word use.
Use.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. I think that, like, going back to journalism, the AP style book is like, get utilize out of here. use. Hey,
but I was just going to say too, Stephen, because like we're talking about building connection, right? And if all of a sudden, like Gavin was saying, the brain is having to think in other ways, it actually ends up disconnecting, right? So it works against you or in the opposite direction of what you're trying to do.
Yeah. And the thing is, everyone knows how to be, when I say everyone, most people know how to be charming because they have a significant other. So somehow, maybe it was only for a fleeting moment, they were charming and they found this significant other. Most people know how to relate to people that are really outside of your, work or job, because you go to a bar, you go to a pub, you're kind of in a social setting, and you don't use words like, I don't empower you to go to the bar and buy me a drink. It's all this language that we use that just, there's a great book that I read a number of years ago. It's called Why Business People Speak Like Idiots. And it's, you don't need to read, you can read the whole book is amusing, but you kind of get the whole thing in the title.
Yeah, you get the point.
So think about this. So it's kind of one thing to tell a story, another to kind of live it. And we talk about systems a lot on this show. What kind of systems or practices do you advise organizations to kind of embed storytelling into their culture so it becomes part of how decisions are made?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm 100% team system. I believe everything is connected, even when you don't really think it is, or it might not be. And I'll give you an example of, I think, something where the system fails. So everyone listening has a 5G phone. I will bet most people that are listening don't know what 5G is. What they probably think is it's one better than 4G. And when AT&T and Verizon come out with 6G, or T-Mobile come out with 6G, they'll be like, I need 6G because that's better than 5G. That's all they know. But somewhere deep in those organizations, there is an engineer that knows exactly what it is, exactly why it's better, exactly what it does. And they couldn't explain it to a product person, or they kind of half explained it because they're speaking to each other in this corporatese. And it's like, I get it. And now I've got a deadline. So now, and then marketing does the same thing, speaking to the product people. So, and then eventually we all get exposed to they're trying to explain to us what 5G is. And we just like, it's better than 4G, right? Because everyone's brain is simplifying things down. I think that conversation between the engineer, the product person, marketing, and then the salesperson, who eventually have to sell something to a customer, is where it all gets complicated and convoluted. And it also speaks to the system. It also speaks to why it's everyone's job to tell stories and be a better storyteller, because you could be the best marketer in the world, but if your product person is speaking Greek to you and you kind of only a little bit understand it, then you're never going to really do a great job. Same with salespeople. I mean, how many marketers go out and they have, I'm going to create the 40-page deck that's the story of our business. Here's the narrative, and they name it a narrative, and they're very proud. And then they get super annoyed when a salesperson picks out 3 slides that they like and use that. It's all connected in a system, and we're not really talking to each other very well.
If there's one big barrier you see to embedding story into like daily business practice, what do you think that is? Or is there multiple?
I think there's multiple. I'm not going to say this is the most important one. But it's something I see a lot. I think a lot of companies and executives kind of take a perverse pride in how complicated their business is, and it's a sign of, it's a kind of a battle honor that you are able to navigate your way through this complicated thing. And they don't really do any work to make it simple. And I think if everyone in an organization said, how can we make this just a little bit simpler, that would start to go a long way. That is the kind of ritual that you want to involve. It's funny. I actually think it's almost like it's the first weird use case of AI, right? You have 3 bullet points, and you want to, I'm going to send this email to Stephen, so I'm going to send this email, and you ask ChatGPT, can you expand these 3 bullet points into something that sounds good, professional, use big words? And ChatGPT does that, and then I send it to Stephen, and Stephen plops it into ChatGPT and said, can you just put this in 3 bullet points, please? And kind of that's what's going on. And we've just automated that now with AI, that weird way of communicating that we have.
Yeah, I think we're doing that about 10 million times over every day now.
Yeah, think of all the GPUs being burnt doing that.
It will be interesting. The other thing I was thinking of with email in particular is it's such a poor form of communication, right? It's not rich. Right. I look forward to a time where maybe they'll just be like a video email, right? Where we could almost just be talking to the person like you're having a conversation, because it's just so much richer. I'm actually curious. So we talk about measurement as well. Obviously, in our agency work that we do, measurement's very important. But I think this is going to be a very interesting segment of the show, right? Because so when it comes to measuring this work that you're doing, like how do leaders actually measure whether the stories that they're telling are actually working, to build the connection and alignment? So
just as an aside, we could do a whole nother show on just measurement and what's wrong with measurement, but I won't go there because it'll take up too much time. I think there's an old answer, and there's a slightly newer answer that I think AI and other new technologies are opening up. So I think the old answer is you were just eyeballing it. Honestly, it's you literally are like a comedian in a club practicing their act and doing their bits, and you're just getting feedback. The feedback isn't people laughing, but it's the feedback is you hear people saying the same things, repeating the same kind of language, and they start to live it. Mm-hmm. So I think that's one part. That's the old way of measuring. Yeah. I think when you've got a really big company, I think one of the great advantages of AI, and we've done this with some of our clients, is you can start to measure culture, which I don't think you could really do before. You had some companies that went out and did surveys, and you've got the kind of the Gallup type stuff that does that. But I honestly think that's kind of a placebo for HR a lot of times. Mm-hmm. I think you can actually begin to measure it, because what you can do, I mean, I think a lot of large companies do this. They'll have pulse surveys, and they'll do them maybe once a quarter. And there's always a little text entry box at the end. The question isn't phrased like this, but is there anything else you'd like to complain about? And then people will go nuts in the text entry box at the end. And I've seen the back end of that. You get a 30,000 row spreadsheet that no one ever reads. With AI, you can do a lot with that information because it's verbatim, unstructured data. Yeah. And what we've done is we've trained AI models on a kind of model of culture, and then given it this verbatim, unstructured data and said, where is this culture today? What are the markers in this culture? And you can then do that as a snapshot, kind of like a polling every so often, and you can see the shift in whatever you're trying to shift and trying to move.
Yeah, it'd be like an EKG reading for your culture. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I love that approach so much. Yeah, like you said, you've got kind of these sort of dry tools we've used for years, but yeah, this has got a lot of juice to it, a lot of nuance, and AI is really good at kind of finding the pulse on those different areas, I imagine.
AI is really good at reading things you don't want to read.
Thank goodness. So, Gavin, maybe since we're on this topic of like the systems, also curious about maybe when like a story-based system perhaps failed or it ended up being a little bit misaligned. Maybe we like to learn from our failings, right, or our mistakes. What did that maybe teach you about recalibrating a culture or about this storytelling system?
Well, so in the book, I talk about different genres of storytelling. Value storytelling, which is about how do you prove out worth, really is the remit of finance and CEOs that are trying to tell their story to the street. Product storytelling for engineers and product people, all the way through sales storytelling, brand storytelling, the typical things you'd think. And the last chapter is on culture storytelling. And what I've tried to do is to pull from real world examples of, modern companies and historical examples as well as I've gone through the book. And there were two companies that I pulled out in the culture storytelling one. And the first one is a really tragic tale. It's Boeing. If you think about it's a storied company. It's been around for a long time, and we all know what in the last couple of years what's happened. Doors have blown off airplanes, spacecraft have got stranded up in space, tragedies as planes have things have not worked and planes have crashed, right? And those are really tragic. But if you I look at that and I think that yes, that's an engineering problem, but it is also, more than anything else, a cultural problem. If you go all the way back to the roots of Boeing, Boeing was founded by Bill Boeing, who was all about data, was an engineer, and this is back in 1910 something around there, because it was his first big gig was selling seaplanes to the Navy around the time of the First World War, and then of course it was one of the engines of the Second World War, building bombers, and then it became preeminent in civil aviation. You think about the first jetliners, the 747. So Boeing is this really storied company. And if you look at the history of the CEOs have way more, a huge outsized impact on any organization because they have both storytelling power and they have hierarchical power. Every CEO of Boeing, from Bill Boeing on, was basically an engineer who'd grown up in Boeing. And they, if you cut them, they would bleed aviation fuel. And around the turn of the century, the CEO at the time decided, I am going to move my corporate headquarters from Seattle, overlooking the airfield where we actually build the planes, to Chicago. And it was a mahogany lined kind of sales corporate office where it still is in Chicago. So imagine the signal that sends in the culture where the CEO, who's always been an engineer, just hightails it out to Chicago. And then that CEO resigned in disgrace for various reasons I won't get into. The next CEO was not even really an engineer. They were more of a finance performance one, and the CEO after that. And those two CEOs started to chase ROI, what they called RONA, return on, I think, net assets. And the engineering culture basically got surpassed by a financial engineering culture. And that was 20 years. So the CEO, that culture, I think, set up all the failures that happened in Boeing, but we don't really talk about that. And I think you can contrast that with another company that's also I looked at in the book. I spoke to a lady who is the corporate historian and storyteller for a company called Fifth Third Bank. Fifth Third Bank is a company that's a big, mid-sized kind of powerhouse bank, financial institution in the Midwest. And they're hundreds of years old. Their CEOs have always been about the customer. They've always been about innovating around the customer. They've immortalized that in the fact they actually have a museum that talks about their corporate history. They bring people through that museum as they onboard them. They have offsites in that museum. They actually have a job of corporate historian and storyteller. They get it, that you kind of build your culture around who you are, around your history. And as I think Brian Chesky said this, culture is the machine that creates all future things. So you have to pay attention to it. And I think that's a big part of what culture storytelling is.
Yeah, I think about that Boeing story. It's like the story went from engineering innovation to now like our purpose is, increasing shareholder value or something like that, right? And it totally changes the whole story for the company.
Yeah, it's like that episode I recall, Steve, that we did on Wells Fargo, right? When that just started to go south. So actually, that's a great segue.
You go back to the thing that everything's a system. The hard thing is you can't see the connection between, we're just going to get better return on net assets to ultimately a cascade of failures.
Yeah. Unfortunately, in that case, it's hindsight is 2020. But that's a great segue into our next segment, because one of the things we love to talk about on the show is purpose and sort of being the North Star. So I'm curious, Gavin, what role should or does purpose serve, and then how does it serve that purpose in the work that you do?
So some of the work we do is we don't create strategy for companies, but at Fassforward we do a lot of translating strategy, jokingly referred to as the McKinsey aftermarket. So it's really thinking about how do you actually get companies to execute on things. And one of this is the way we think about it. Everything, strategy, leadership, execution, culture, is all connected by a single word: do. Strategy is what you intend to do. Leadership is what you're trying to inspire people to do, or your leaders are trying to inspire people to do things. Execution is the result of what you do. But culture is how you do things around here. And all of those things have to line up. And the best thing to line up against is purpose. Because if you don't line up against that, if you don't line up against why people are there, why the organization is there, why the team is there, why the individuals are there, then you're just pushing against these winds that you can't really see.
Yeah, I think that is probably the best succinct answer that I've heard to that question. Right? It's why we show up every day.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's awesome.
So we got a
Steve,
question from the
our audience.
user.
Yeah.
LinkedIn user, how can storytelling help a brand feel more human in this age of AI?
That's like a $64,000 question, or maybe a few more zeros on that. Well, I think what AI is doing right now, and I don't know where it's going to go, obviously, but I think AI is right now shortening the path between idea and result. So I have an idea, and here's the result of what I do. And you're actually having to do less and less interaction between the idea and the result. So I think that OpenAI is sponsoring a movie. There's a new movie coming out called Critters, where they've got Hollywood screenwriters and Hollywood actors to do the screenplay and do the writing, but all the animation is going to be done by AI. So the path between idea and result is just going like this. Yeah. What it doesn't change is quality. And I think that's where humans come in. I could do everything I do a lot faster. Am I doing it better? And there's no way that AI right now takes care of that. That's why you see AI slop. That's why you see all these books on Amazon for sale that were created in 2 days, but if you actually read them, you don't want to read them. So I think storytelling can help a brand feel more human through quality of story. But also I think there's an idea I explore in the book where brand storytelling is world building. I think really clever brands stand out because they build worlds, and you want to be a fan and a part of that world. Now, you might typically think that's kind of Harley Davidson or Marvel or something that really fits into that. I think IKEA does that. I think Salesforce does that. I think there's lots of brands that do that, but they don't really pay attention to it as world building. And you know you're doing world building when everything connects in your world. It would be like this. If you think about, if you've ever read a book with a lot of characters in, and the character names and backstories are very confusing, that would be the equivalent of a company, a brand, having a lot of products whose product names and backstories are very confusing. You put down that book pretty quickly. And I think that's the kind of human element of thinking about this kind of putting story into it. Humans are going to provide the quality, I guess, is my short answer.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you for that question to our audience.
Yeah, no, that was a great answer too. Thinking about that, can you share a story where a narrative maybe shifted the way a business and team connected, kind of driving the results or sparking innovation somehow, where that connection came to play around the story, just kind of pulling everything together?
Well, I think the Boeing answer, the story about Boeing is a counterexample. The story about Fifth Third Bank is another one. I'll answer it slightly differently in that I think most AI is upon us. AI is interacting with every single function because it's a general purpose technology. There isn't a business I know that isn't trying to figure out what to do with AI. But what that ultimately means is change, and humans are going to be part of that change. And I think when you're telling that and you're shifting this change, you're always having to tell two stories. We call them, we thought long and hard about this and called them story one and story two. So story two is the destination. Where are we going, and what does this look like when we get there? This organizational change, this digital transformation, whatever it is we're trying to do. Story one is the journey. What's the route to get there? you need to tell both those stories in a very human, emotional way. You've got to remember that the audience, the people that you're trying to get to embrace this change, have to see themselves in the picture. So they have to be the hero of both stories, all of that good stuff. But you have to tell both stories. And most companies kind of default to one. They either just paint the shining city on the hill and they don't explain to anyone how to get there, or they just tell people we're going, and here are the financial results that we need to get to on the way, and no one wants to go. And what happens in every company almost inevitably, and everyone has a kind of free get out of jail free card to do this, is people will always do what they did yesterday. Because I didn't get in trouble yesterday. I did a good job yesterday. I didn't really understand what you were talking about. So I'm just waiting for you to figure it out, and I'll do what I did yesterday. And then we wonder why organizations have a huge amount of inertia, why they don't change. It's because we're not telling the right story.
I love the simplicity of story one, and the story two, the destination. That was very clarifying, I think, for a lot of people who kind of struggle with all that.
I think just one thing I would add too, Steve, what you're saying, that is when leadership changes, right? That's like the part that is scary for me, but it sounds like, the stories are what hold it together, right? If there's leadership change or merger or acquisition, could be a very scary time for an organization. But yeah, the stories really seem to make it real and keep it together.
Change is scary. And if you think about, if you go to a horror movie, it's always dark. There's always things that you can't quite see, can't quite make out around the corner. The imagination is way worse than the real. If they floodlit a horror movie and you could see the makeup and the props, there would be nothing scary about it. So I don't think we learn that lesson when we think about organizational change.
So, Gavin, one question we ask on the show is about the role of love in business. For you, I'm thinking of a question around how does love and compassion factor into storytelling and leadership in your view?
It is a good question. So I should have started with this really. My definition of storytelling is not the way a Hollywood screenwriter would describe it. It's not a fairy tale. My definition of a story in a business context, in story business, is it's a piece of information wrapped in emotion. And love, I think, is one of the most powerful emotions. I talk in the book about a tool we use called a motive triangle: hope, fear, and reason. And I think really good communicators span all three things. Really poor communicators tend to just go with reason and they ignore hope and fear. If you just start with the fear bit, you'll get instant reaction, but you won't get any long-term pull. If you have the hope, the love bit, then you'll get the long-term follow-through, but it's a lot slower. So I think you need all three. And I think as a storyteller, you need a huge amount of empathy, because if you think you're telling a story about yourself, you're completely wrong. You're just not a storyteller. You're just someone that loves themselves.
Yeah, I think too, storytelling almost, at its heart, it's really an act of empathy in a lot of ways, with saying, I kind of see you, I understand you, let me bring you along together in this. It definitely is an act of empathy in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's a good package for it, that information wrapped in emotion. So Gavin, this has been a great conversation. For our listeners that are tuning in now or might later on, where can they go to explore your work or perhaps connect with you a little bit further?
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn. If you're interested in the book and the ideas in the book, if you go to story-business.com, or you can look it up on Amazon. It just dropped this week, so it's just literally just come out. If you're interested in Fassforward as a company, we're fassforward.com, but it's two S's, not F. It's FASS, not FAST. Fassforward.com. And so, I hope people check out the book. It's been a labor of love. My next wish is that somebody actually reads it. That would be nice. So we'll see how that goes.
And applies it. Yeah, we want them to apply the information.
Yeah, that's the win after the read it first.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gavin, and thank you to our audience. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If it inspires you to revisit your own narrative, share it with someone else who will benefit. Until next time, we'll see you on the next Bliss Business Podcast.